The 60s were not kind to me, and my 80s weren't much better. When you get to about my age, which happens to be the ripe one of 82 and 4 months, but who's counting? You begin to realize that you only have a limited number of things to actually do, and despite all the money that you stockpiled up like all those bunker nuts during Cold War and all that social security, your money isn't really worth jack shit. Right now, I'm sitting on a mound of cold, hard cash, and despite how sweet that may sound to a younger, less advanced, as they're calling us, person, I still have sores up and down my ass. I'll spare you the details, but again, when you're about my age, you can only spend those dollars coming out of your crack a few select places gambling on a bingo night, Tuesdays and Thursdays with the typing plates of religious organization or denomination of your choice. Scratch off lottery tickets and microwave hot dog from the local gas station if the bus makes a pit stop, or buying superfluous knickknacks off of those home shopping channels with your husband's credit card. Personally, I'm sick of the bingos, just fine with my Father Meyer bi-weekly visits. Prefer the microwave junk from the cafeteria, and didn't have a husband or a wife anymore. And also don't bother ordering from the television. I simply just watched it. Or at least I used to watch it. You would think that you've seen this on your day called the television privileges were taken away after the age of day 6, say 6, but that show you love changes things, doesn't it? First time I remember it coming on was the night of August 28th. It was a Thursday and it was a bingo night again. If memory serves, we'll get to that in a bit. I had just lost $28 to Dan Rosenberg from room 94 and was sitting on my bed wondering what the hell I allowed myself to bet with a former attorney at the law. The rule was unwritten, but we shook it onto it, no winning the easy way. Free space, old Danny boy swore up and down that we never agreed on such a term, and even though the man's mind wasn't what it used to be, the wheelchair-bound shyster knew full well that he didn't have a big leg to stand on. Unfortunately, I didn't either, and technically B12, just like the vitamin, did a complete of his diagonal down. Suffice to say it, I was heated when I got back to my room. So much that when the TV began blaring that crappy old music you'd hear from a tin can would whistle Freeze Company, I immediately fumbled for the remote. The set itself is, and was ancient by today's standards, a CRT boob tube that would zap ya if you tapped the screen multiple with rabbit ears, or so tall, you would think you would be seeing a freaking Easter bunny in the late summertime. No matter what you played on the dopey thing, everything from those sleek cell phone commercials and The Godfather looked like a 70s promo. Not that I would know of course. I was about to shut the hunk of the junk off when the face of the gorgeous young woman, at least young to me, probably in her late 30s, caught my eye, and then the rest of her. She was folding the laundry and whistling something I couldn't quite make out, and as the machine beneath her leaning tower of clothes wobbled and shook a fresh load, the one on top of it did look like the same as the upper 6 odd shirts and blouses tumbled to the floor. I chuckled to myself as the laugh track played, and I leaned back onto my pillow, being a somewhat easy man to entertain, especially considering these days I only watch the news and traffic report, knowing full well of my license is well past expired, mind you. I crossed my legs and turned up the volume. She was whistling Sharp Dressed Man by ZZ Top, a song choice that slowly began to make sense as soon as I casually dressed as one, presumably her husband, entered the room in his boxers or briefs. In one hand he held a toothbrush that danced around between his lips. The other was empty, and he used it to slap the woman on the ass. I hate to date myself more than I already have, but back in my day Lucy and Ricky slept in separate beds till 55, and then the Flintstones did it, and then if a cartoon could, the rest of them would do, and they did. point being watching a woman's ass getting slapped on national television was something I never dreamed of seeing all those years of staring reruns at Lash Lore. But an old boy can dream, can't he? Apparently I must have been, because the next thing I knew, I was seated upright with a pool of drool on my lap, staining my own boxers with saliva. "How'd we sleep last night, Mr. Benson?" The youthful voice of my nurse rang out and interrupted my thoughts. I couldn't see her, but if it were a day that ended in Y, she was stirring my crushed up pills into a cup of applesauce. I thought about her question and my lips parted with a grin. "Who is this we, Jessica? 'Cause I slept like a baby." "That makes one of us," she said, puffing up my pillow and handing me the cup. "You still in that honors class?" She shook her head, turning down the television. I watched as the toothpaste commercial ended, and That Show You Love started up again. "I am, well, but not for long," she said, settling the remote down on the nightstand with a little clack. The show was a mid-episode. It seemed like the wifely woman, her hair bunched up from the bedhead, and while kissing her husband goodbye as he lifted the briefcase and straightened his tie. Typical Americana. My eyes then snapped back to Nurse Jessica, back to reality, and there was the faintest look on her face that maybe Old Man Benson was finally losing it. "You shouldn't quit too soon," I said. "It's only been a week." "A terrible week, Mr. Benson," she said as she approached me. "But don't you worry about that," she smiled. "I'll be fine." The woman on the television over her shoulder was brushing her teeth in her pajamas now. The shower beside her was running hot water, was evident by the fog coating the mirror glass. She dropped the brush and tumbled it to the sink. I couldn't help but smirk at the lapstick and the envision of the Stooges doing the same, a laugh track echoing inside my head as if on cue on the fumble. I then turned my still grinning gaze back to Jessica. "I know you will," I said, and she took my expression as a sign of goodwill. "Good." Nurse Jessica cleared her throat. "As for you, Mr. Benson," she began, but that's as much as I heard. Behind her, the woman in a box screen had taken off her pajama shirt, likely an oversized t-shirt of her husband's, and then she started to begin to pull the plush pajamas pants down to her ankles, and clear as day, despite my cataracts, I could see her pale white ass and breast in the mirror. "And that means a minimum of 8 hours of sleep," Jessica continued. I grabbed the remote that she had placed onto a nearby nightstand and clicked off the TV in a shamble. She spun around, looked at her own reflection in the window, lit back black void, and then turned back to me on her heel. I said, "I can't get 8 hours with this set on." The nurse wagged her hand and continued. I didn't hear a word of it. When Jessica finally left, which was after a grueling 15 more minutes, that felt more or like 4 hours, I lifted the remote from my lap and pressed my thumb against the tile red button. The woman appeared on the screen again, only now she was fully clothed and standing on the kitchen. Her hair still wet from the shower. Nearby television of her own was playing, even though it was far nicer than the quite literal boob tube that stood before me. I turned it up. "That's what I said," a woman's voice faded in. "But you know he didn't listen." I knew right away it wasn't the showered woman's voice. Hers was too busy laughing at the voice coming from her flat-screen TV. They were both in respective kitchens, cutting some kind of leafy green on a chopping board. She was watching a cooking show. I told him that. The woman on the cooking show continued. I noticed that there was a cell phone wedged in between her shoulder and her ear, and the wet-haired wife listened along as she sliced the vegetables. This went on for a good 20 or so minutes, until then again I fell asleep. When I finally opened my crusted over eyes, Nurse Jessica was standing over me with the dinner plate. It was dark outside, the window was just to the left of the TV, and on its screen, the woman and her husband were watching something themselves, even though the angle was on them, and I couldn't see what it was. "Got your 8 hours in, Mr. Benson?" Jessica asked with a grin, getting a plate on the little swiveling tray before me, meatloaf and corn. "What time is it?" I groaned, sitting up a little. I hated corn. It always came out whole. 8:30. I sighed. That's 9 hours today, I said. A new record. Jessica shook her head as she salted the meatloaf. I did need my sodium after all. If all I did was watch this all day, she said, her eyes lifting to the image of the couple on the couch, I'd sleep for 9 hours too, Mr. Benson. She wished me a good night, and as soon as she shut the door, I turned up the volume which she had taken the liberty of turning down, even though there was not much to listen to. It was some kind of show that they were watching. None of the voices in it sound familiar, but it sure kept their attention. I watched as I forked down the meatloaf, avoiding that pesky yellow corn, until the couple stood, clicked off the program, and made their way off screen. There was a good 20 seconds where I simply just stared at the empty living room. At first I thought the cable box might have given out, or maybe if there was a glitch. But before I had the time to do anything about it, which wouldn't have been much, a new shot appeared. It was off of their apartment and bedroom, and Miss whatever her name was waltzing through the doorway seductively in some kind of lingerie. Her husband, in his boxers again, sat on the edge of the bed before standing up and approaching her. It was at this point when the two began passionately kissing, and the same point when I then wondered what the hell kind of late-night channel I had accidentally been watching for the past 2 days. I hit the guide and was presented with, perhaps, an even stranger sight. The channel wasn't listed, but instead I was taken to the list of programs playing on the channels, one of the 5 in the weather reports in the corner. I clicked back on the show, and now this couple was on the bed, making out like bandits. I'll spare you the details, but let me just say that it was the first time I had a stiffy since Janet Jackson's little wardrobe malfunction at the '04 Super Bowl. Despite my little excitement, however, I figured that it was neither the time or a place to be watching After Hours channel. Much like when Mom would catch Harry and I on the living room rug watching the Twilight Zone instead of the Captain Kangaroo when he was 6. God forbid that Snoop Dan Rosenberg should point this out, pointy little nose through the crack in my door and see me watching this. Not to mention Nurse Jessica. So I turned off that show you love, shook my head, and leaned back on my pillow. The image of the couple never left me that night, and I couldn't really fully tell if I was feeling a bit of libido, a bit of creeps, or something else in between. Regardless of my feelings, however, the show had me hooked, line and sinker. I didn't even know the characters' names or any of the plot, but still I felt compelled to watch it. It was when the slice of life bullshit that Amy always loved, of course minus the gratuitous sex. It was truly that show you love, that show that I now loved. After indecisively rolling back and forth between the covers, I grabbed the remote between my legs and clicked on the red button again. Immediately my finger dashed to the volume control, pressing it until the number on the upper right corner virtually became 0. With the effort that was little need, the couple was asleep, and not a sound emanated from the television other than the white noise that scratched at my ears. I stared on it like the voyeuristic swine for a good 3 confused minutes, until I myself drifted off to dreamland. When I came to again, with a streak of the split bit along my chin, Nurse Jessica was hoisting me up onto the bus. It was Saturday, which meant activity day, and for a group of geezers that could barely walk, not to mention sit up straight, and the outings usually included bowling, if we were feeling frisky, the local indoor shopping mall, and my mall, by mall I mean the food court, or the grocery store. You wouldn't think of putting a box of Raisin Bran into a wheeled steel cage would classify as a fun Saturday outing. But the alternative, watching The Price is Right for 8 hours while thinking about all the grandkids comparatively didn't have, paled in comparison. Before Jessica escorted me onto the bus, however, in that half-awake, half-asleep twilight, that yawn usually snaps you right out of it, I watched as the woman on that show you love kissed her husband goodbye, and only this time it was she was leaving the house in a bright yellow blouse, purse hanging from her shoulder. The next shot which looked to be about the same for the intro of the show as with that jolly jingle, was the house itself, and the woman shut the front door and strut to her car. As the shot slowly widened, the stark white mailbox drifted into view reading plainly Johnson. Finally, I thought, I have a name. I continued thinking about the show all the way to the mall and when we had finished eating at the food court, many of us, especially Fat Joe as we call him, got the hankering for the supermarket. So we went in, at least the bus went, and as it pulled up like a shot out of the Night of the Living Dead, another program my mom ran my neck for watching, we shuffled into the fluorescent gleam of aisles upon aisles of processed junk food. Heaven for all those of us weren't quite there yet. As I spun my cart into the aisles to grab free myself a handful of cheesy puffs in that 10-gallon drum, my feet squeaked to a top faster, and then my brain ever could have stand out into the end of the aisles and reaching for a jar of peanut butter on her toes with the woman from That Show You Love. The same way wifely woman, one of the few times I've seen it. I have suspected the show to be a local broadcast. Not to mention the members of the cast were actually residents of Des Plaines, Illinois. I have never met anyone famous up to my life until that point. Maybe besides sharing a connecting flight with one of the main members of Frankie Val's Four Seasons. And because of that I have never so felt that, as they call it, butterflies feeling. That feeling when you're starstruck. While my stomach wasn't exactly fluttering at that moment in time, it was in some manner a bit uneasy, and probably wasn't the food court either. I couldn't help my cold feet as I approached her, but maybe due to the intimacy I had seen her on in screen, I felt somewhat comfortable tapping the stranger on the shoulder with my brittle fingers. She spun around clutching the last jar, and I extended with a warm smile. "Hello, young lady," I said, nodding my head. She was more stunning in person. "Hello," she replied, mirroring my same gesture. We stood silently as the hum of the overhead speakers played some kind of saxophone crap. I cleared my throat, but before I could speak, she continued, "Were you looking for this, sir?" I followed her eyes down to the peanut butter. "No," I said. "No, ma'am." She nodded silently at me. For a starlet, she was rather shy. "I just wanted to say that I'm a big fan." Her eyes narrowed off of her brows frowned, looking at me as if they were bug-eyed. "A big fan?" she asked, shaking her head off. "Of?" I chuckled. "Your show." The woman smile faded from her cheeks and continued to shake her noggin. "I'm sorry, sir. You must have the wrong woman." "You don't have to be coy," I said, raising her hand, realizing her personal modesty. "I just want to tell you that your work has made an old man very entertained," I nervously huffed. The woman looked down to the aisles with Weaver's side, and when she saw no one was around, stepped a bit closer to me. "What, work?" Now my smile was gone too, and my voice deepened. "You play Miss Johnson on That Show You Love." The woman's face drained of all of its color and her cheeks hollowed out. She just stared at me for a good 30 seconds in that aisle, the jar of peanut butter close to bursting between her fingers. "Mister," she finally said with a hushed, low tone, "I am Miss Johnson." I licked my lips and started to shake my head. "But you're—" She stopped me. "I'm not on TV." We stood silently across from one another until she set the jar back on the shelf and placed down the aisles, occasionally looking over her cold shoulder at me until she disappeared behind a wall of marshmallow bags. Then it hit me that her absence. She had been wearing the same yellow blouse and shoulder-hung purse from this morning's episode. Perhaps I was having an episode of my own. That night I simply just stared at the black void screen of the television set, never once turning it on. I couldn't sleep, even despite the warm milk Nurse Jessica had given me. I was chilled to the brittle bone. Eventually, when the darkness outside faded into the glow of the orange-yellow sunrise through the curtains, I mustered up the strength to press. Once again, that little red button. The button on my finger had been resting on it all night, but was too timid to dare to push. The TV flashed on, and I winced in expectation to see the woman and her husband, perhaps in bed or making an early breakfast. It said the shot was of their bedroom, yes, but on top of their covers, as opposed to the couple being under them. The two fixed suitcases, Mr. Johnson, as he might have been called, was continually looking around the house back and forth and tossing the clothes and neckties and black suit pants to the zippered bag. At times, he stared straight at the camera, which was apparently in some way hidden from his view. Miss Johnson, indeed the woman I had seen at the aisles of the grocer, was frantically yelling at something at him. I cautiously turned up the volume. "I just don't know how it's possible, honey," her husband said, flailing his arms. "I looked all right, couldn't find a single one." "I know what," he said. She snapped back. "It's completely crazy, but how do you the hell he know?" "He was probably just an old pervert," her husband replied, shoving something into a bag. "I think I'll give that to Sunny Gardens a call. That's what it said on the bus, right?" "Right." "Oh shit," I thought to myself. And that shit, which proverbially hit the fan right then, that night, came in the form of the single solitary word that none of us here at Sunny Gardens ever wanted to hear. Not even Dan Rosenberg next door. No, not even him. It was a word that meant all those funny looks at the lobby, the extra pills to swallow, and the rigid visitation rites. Not that anyone was visiting me anyway. Dementia. "It's a precaution," Nurse Jessica said, as she crushed the new medicine into my applesauce, stirring it alongside others. She probably thought I was crazy just like everyone else. Not only for the phone call, but that home had been anonymously received about a certain old man in a stained wife-beater, and also because I had requested her to close the curtains and keep them shut, even during the day. The sunlight would still bleed into the room, but without the glow of the TV, whose remote was now hidden from me. The only other source of light was that of the lamp on the nightstand. She handed me a cup and I instinctively lifted the cold steel off the spoon. "Do you think I'm nuts, Jessica?" "Of course not," she shook, but I could tell she was lying. "You just need a little extra care right now, Mr. Benson." I thanked Jessica, unable to convince her that I wasn't lonely, and let her wrap up her shift for the night. About an hour later, just as I was about to sit silently and stare into the voided screen that reflected my face back to me, but there was a knock at my door. "Come in," I said, with a strained voice, and in stepped one of the ascent nurses. Nurse Becky, if memory serves. She smiled, but it was a nervous one. Everyone around here thought I had somehow fled my covers by the cover of the night, and we went to play Peeping Tom down the street to come find out the Johnsons only had lived a couple of blocks from the home. "Mr. Benson," she said, somewhat clunky, "you have a visitor." I snapped my head to face her. "I do?" She nodded. From behind her stepped in a woman I had never seen before, smiling brunette woman. "I'll let you two be alone," she said, and ducked into the hallway. The woman approached my bed, and I sat up hastily, pulling the covers up to my chest. I stuttered. "Do I know you?" She extended a pink envelope, a pink baggie, towards me in either hand. "Probably not," she said, in a tired voice. But she wasn't right, though I had never met this woman. That voice of hers sounded eerily familiar. As I watched her hands tremble, still upholding the gifts, suddenly it clicked. She was a woman on Mr. Johnson's TV in her kitchen. I had done a lot of cheap dope in my heyday, but this was way worse. "Wait," I said gruffly. "Don't you run a cooking show?" She shook her head, and then she shook the gifts in her hand. I took the card and unwrapped it. It was one of those get-well-soon ones with a little puppy on front, a thermometer in its mouth. I looked at the woman as I opened it, and could see in the lamplight she must have recently been crying. Her eyes were sunken and puffy red. Inside the card, written in black ink, was a note. It rather lent bluntly, "Stop looking through windows, Roger." The woman then set her baggie on my lap, and without another word left the room. I sat in silence for a moment, and the open card was in my hands, and then placed on the card was on my stomach. I lifted the little baggie. Inside there was a television remote wrapped in a newspaper. Another television remote, strikingly similar to the one from home, hidden from me. I aimed it at the box and pressed the same colored red button. "That show you love, rather that show I once loved," came on screen, and it was a different sight, a different house entirely. As a matter of fact, seated at a desk and punching something into a laptop was a young woman with a long, wet, jet black hair. I immediately clicked off the set again with a quivering hand. I didn't need to see her face to know who it is. It was Nurse Jessica. I still haven't told her. See, that newspaper it wrapped in the remote in the baggie. It wasn't there for fluff's sake. Come to find out, on the page stamped with the number 16, at the very tip top with all the other classifieds, and it was the advertisement for the Moodist suburban home. One that looked all too familiar. But that wasn't all. On the back page at the very bottom were two "Have you seen me?" bulletins. I think you could figure out those faces were in those pictures. I kept my curtains drawn even now, unless I wanted to be curtains for me, too. If the woman who had stood in this very room that night, holding the card and bag in her hands, had been watched by Miss Johnson, and I had been watching her, then who the hell was been watching me? I got that answer last night. I was up in bed, reading the Agatha Christie novel, and all I could do without the company of the boob tube. Not that I wanted anymore. There was a knocking at my door, and it was Nurse Jessica. Just as I had every time I since saw her in black locks on that damned screen, I winced and curbed the reaction to a smile. "Mr. Benson?" "Yes, Jessica?" She smiled and extended the envelope. "Looks like someone very popular person here at Sunny Gardens." If only she knew. I was forced to smile and took it from her. She bid me good night, and I did the same, ever so desperately waiting for her to leave. When she finally did, I tore it open, and this is what was written inside the sheet of paper. "Dear Mr. Benson, you don't know me, but I like to think that I know you. Call me your secret admirer, though. I suppose I'm not so secret anymore. You have given me a lot of joy for these past few weeks when you got that unsightly you-know-what in your bed. I laughed just about as hard as I did when I first watched Blazing Saddles on Turner Classics. My father passed away back in June, and he and I used to watch that channel all the time before I found this one. I like to think that your presence with me day and night has been something of comfort in these trying times of mine. You remind me of my father. I noticed that there was a lump on your lower back, right of my left on hand side, a marking that unfortunately reminds me of Dad's appointments of late. It's a shame that Jessica never caught it, especially considering how hard she had been studying. I hope you'll tell her about it later. Just don't tell her about the show. I miss the Johnsons, and I'm sure you do too. Sincerely yours, your biggest fan." What's up, my pretties? It's the Lion Queen here. I want to appreciate you all for tuning into this video, and I do appreciate you guys supporting my video by giving this video likes and stuff. If you really enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, comment and subscribe if you're new, ring the bell for notifications to when I upload so that way you guys will get updated for whenever I upload. If you want to follow me on Twitter or DeviantArt, feel free to leave a follow on those if you are interested in following me on those socials. If you want to support my backup channel, known as Miss Dark Shigo, feel free to subscribe to it, as a link to that will also be in the About page section. And with that being said, and that being the case, thank you so much for watching, my pretties, and as always, please stay pretty.